Technology is rarely neutral in learning. It doesn't simply add convenience or access. It changes pace. It changes expectations. It changes what people believe learning should actually feel like. But when technology supports learning, it often goes unnoticed. When it interferes, the effects are often subtle at first and easy to misdiagnose. Welcome to Learning Reframed, Education Without the Noise. I'm Dr. Ken Feldman, and this podcast looks at how learning actually works inside real constraints, without hype, shortcuts, or unnecessary complexity. Let's get started. Conversations about technology and learning often fall into two extreme categories. One, the first side of technology, it's framed as a solution. It's faster, smarter, more engaging. On the other, it's framed as a distraction that should be reduced or totally eliminated. Both views miss something that's really important. Technology doesn't improve learning by itself, and it doesn't undermine learning automatically. What matters is how it shapes attention and effort. Most digital tools promise efficiency. They reduce friction, speed up access, and compress time. Now, that could be helpful, especially for organizational skills, retrieval, and communication. But learning doesn't always benefit from speed. When information arrives too easily, people often move on before understanding forms, before understanding settles in. When answers appear too quickly, they need to wrestle with a problem disappears. Learning becomes consumption rather than construction. This doesn't mean technology should be avoided. It means it should be used intentionally. One useful distinction is between tools that support thinking and those that replace it. Tools that support thinking help our students organize ideas, visualize relationships, externalize working memory, revisit material thoughtfully. But tools that replace thinking tend to provide answers way too quickly, automate decisions prematurely, engage skipping intermediate steps, and that difference isn't always obvious. And the same tool can do both depending on how it's used. Another key issue is cognitive load. Many learning platforms combine text, visuals, notifications, links, and prompts into a single experience. Each element seems helpful on its own, but together they fragment one's attention. The result often is seen as mental fatigue without meaningful learning. And when the learners feel overwhelmed by a platform, they sometimes assume the problem is the complexity of the content, but in reality, it's often the environment. The other issue is that of pacing. Technology tends to accelerate learning activities. Videos play automatically, tasks queue instantly, and feedback arrives immediately. While feedback is key and essential, constant immediacy can prevent reflection. Learning benefits from pauses, from reflection, moments when information can settle in and the connections form. Without those pauses, learners may complete tasks without integrating that knowledge of what they've actually done. This is especially true in our younger learners, but it applies to all as well. Professionals often use technology to squeeze learning into small gaps of time. They can work for exposure and review, but deeper understanding usually requires slower, much more deliberate engagement. A final concern is substitution. When technology becomes the primary interface for learning, relational elements can erode. Conversation, clarification, and shared sense-making are harder to replicate digitally. We'll speak about that in a future podcast on active learning for our students in classrooms. This doesn't mean learning must be face-to-face. What it does mean that learning works best when the tools support relationships rather than replace them. So what actually helps? First, let's choose fewer tools and use them consistently. Novelty increases cognitive load. Being familiar with the tools reduces it. Second, let's separate learning from stimulation. If a platform competes for your attention, it'll almost always win, and learning will always lose. Third, build in moments where technology just stops. Reflection, discussion, and synthesis often work better off screen. Technology is most effective when it fades into the background and allows thinking to come forward. Technology shapes learning whether we acknowledge its presence or not. More to come about AI. The question isn't whether to use it, but whether it's quietly supporting understanding or just simply replacing it. This distraction is easy to miss, but really important to notice. If today's episode resonated with you, follow our podcast on your favorite platform and give us a like on YouTube. But more importantly, share this episode with someone who you feel might find it helpful. I'm Ken Feldman. Thanks for listening to Learning Reframed. We'll see you next time.